I never imagined this day would unfold like this. Me, Clara, 23 years old, sitting there, not really knowing what to do with my hands, just staring at the stage, at the faces around me, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. Harvard, the university my older sister Julia had always dreamed of, and now she was graduating. The whole family was there. Well, at least the ones that really mattered. Me? Well, I was there, but not because I wanted to be. I was there because someone had to show up. They didn't even bother to include me. My name wasn't on the invite, not on the guest list, like I was some kind of mistake they were trying to forget. Me, who grew up always feeling like the extra, a shadow to my sister's perfection. There I was, no formal invite, just a piece of paper that said guest in a plain font. I couldn't even look at my dad when he saw me because his look said it all. A look that was empty, like he was just confirming I was there without really seeing me. My mom, Celeste, who always acted like she owned the world, barely acknowledged me. The only thing she said was a dry, "Oh, Clara, you showed up," with that tone of someone who didn't expect anything from me. Julia looked radiant, as always. She wore that graduation gown with honor cords draped over her, her smile so big it seemed to fill up the whole room. I felt tiny next to her, like I was in the corner, invisible. My parents were by her side and everything seemed perfect in their world, as if I didn't even exist. Like my being there was just an accident of fate. They were so caught up in the image of perfection they had created with Julia that there was no room for me. I just kept watching what was happening around me, like a spectator in my own life. It wasn't my life, not really. And I knew that. I felt it. Every glance at the stage, every applause, every smile. It was like a show, and I was watching, unable to participate. Then my dad stood up. He adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and with that voice he used to sound important, he started to speak. "Today is a very special day," he said, with that fake smile, looking at Julia like she was the only one that mattered. "We are here to celebrate the efforts of our daughter, who has made history at this university. Our family, as always, is immensely proud of her." I wanted to believe he was talking about me, but I knew he wasn't. When he looked out at the audience and started talking about values, my stomach dropped. I knew where this was going. I'd heard this speech before. When he said, "A necessary shift in energy, a shift that we needed," I felt the knot in my stomach. He was about to exclude me, about to do something I never imagined would happen. But the pain was already there. I just didn't know it would come so publicly. "And so," he continued, "from this day forward, we will no longer be extending ourselves to those who do not align with our values. This includes our youngest daughter, Clara." I froze. The whole ceremony went quiet. There was no gasp, no reaction. I just sat there, still, feeling each word hit me like a knife. I didn't look at anyone, not my mom, not Julia. I just stared at the stage, and at my dad, who now had the smile he always gave to others, but never to me. I slowly stood up. No rush. My body was there, but my mind was already elsewhere. I wasn't empty, though. I wasn't anything, just tired. I'd been playing this role of invisible daughter for so long that I didn't even know what I was feeling anymore. No tears, no shouting. I just walked out of the ceremony, slowly, like someone who already knew what was happening, but didn't want to believe it. The heat of the sun outside felt unbearable, and the crowd around me was completely unaware of my presence, as it always had been. Deep down, I knew what I had to do. They thought they had erased me, but they didn't know what I knew. I wasn't the excluded daughter. I wasn't the family shadow. I knew about the secrets, the lies, the forged documents. I knew that part of what was mine had been stolen from me. The beach house that was supposed to be mine, but now I knew what to do with that. I wasn't going to be Clara, the invisible one anymore. I was going to expose the truth, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but because it was the only thing I had left. I was going to make them face everything they'd hidden, everything they tried to steal from me. But first, I needed to get my head together. I needed to go home, to my small apartment and think, just think. Because the silence I was hearing now was the sound of my own revolution. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was someone with a story to tell. I couldn't believe it. I mean, part of me always knew something was off, but hearing my father's words in front of everyone, it was like I had been slapped across the face. The public disowning, the words of exclusion, the complete disregard for me, it was just too much. But the anger, the real rage, didn't come immediately. No, it was more like a slow burn, creeping up inside me, turning into something I couldn't ignore. I was quiet, at least on the outside. But on the inside, I was screaming. Not just for what they did to me today, but for every single moment they had let me feel like I didn't matter, like I was just an afterthought in their perfect world. The years of feeling invisible, of being the other daughter, it all came flooding back. They always treated me like I was the shadow of their perfect golden child, Julia. It wasn't just about today. It was about the fact that I had spent my entire life on the sidelines, trying to get their attention, trying to prove that I was just as worthy. But no matter how hard I tried, I was always second place. They made it clear with their actions. They always spoke about me like I didn't even exist. And in moments like today, it was as if they erased me entirely. But that rage, it didn't explode. I wasn't going to let it. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down, of seeing me cry in front of everyone. No, I held it in, pushing it deep down, but it didn't go away. It grew. And then, later that day, I found the envelope. The one they thought I'd never find. The one they thought I'd never dare to look for. It was tucked away in my parents' office, just sitting there on top of a pile of dusty old files. A simple envelope. But when I opened it, I felt my blood run cold. Inside was a property contract. On the surface, it seemed like nothing. A document, a simple piece of paper. But as I read it, I realized what it meant. The signature wasn't mine. I looked at it again, my hands shaking now. This wasn't just some clerical mistake. This was deliberate. The house, the beach house I had always thought would be mine, was no longer in my name. It had been sold, and Julia's name was on the paperwork. My own parents had erased me from their lives, and now they had erased me from their legacy too. That property, the one my grandmother left to me, had been quietly transferred to Julia without my knowledge. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a crime. I knew that. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let them get away with this. But I also knew I had to be smart about it. I couldn't let my anger drive me into rash decisions. I needed to take my time. I had to gather everything, proof, documents, evidence that would expose the truth. I started looking through old files, flipping through boxes of papers they had shoved in every corner of their office. Every piece of paper, every note, I scoured it all. And that's when I started finding the pieces. The small details they thought no one would notice. The little things that didn't add up. It was all there. The forgeries, the missing signatures. They had planned this for so long, and I had no idea. But now I had the upper hand. I started making notes, taking pictures of the documents, everything. They wouldn't get away with this. I thought about Julia. I thought about how she had always played the perfect daughter, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. How they always treated her like she was the golden child, like she was the only one worth celebrating. And there I was, stuck in her shadow, never truly seen. But now, I knew. Julia wasn't just innocent in this. She knew about everything. She had to have. She'd always played the role of the sweet, charming daughter, but I was starting to realize how deep this went. She had been part of this whole scheme to push me out. She was just as involved in the lies and the deception as my parents were. I had always suspected something, but now I knew for sure. She wasn't just the darling of the family. She was complicit in everything. I wasn't going to let this go. I was done being the quiet one, the one who was always left behind. No, I had something they didn't count on. I had the truth, and I was going to make sure they couldn't bury it anymore. The days that followed were a blur of quiet determination. I wasn't just angry anymore. The rage had been there, sure, but it had evolved into something else. It wasn't about the insults or the public shaming. It wasn't about the fact that I had been erased from the family's picture for so long. No, it was about something much bigger. My parents had made a mistake, a huge one, and they didn't even know how big it was. But I did, and I was going to make sure they would regret it. I threw myself into my research, into uncovering every piece of evidence I could find. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I started digging deeper, poring over every document I could get my hands on. Old files, bank statements, the property deeds, all of it. The more I looked, the more I found. There were discrepancies, signatures that didn't match, dates that didn't add up. The house, my grandmother's property, had been sold behind my back, but that was just the beginning. They'd been moving money around, laundering it through fake transactions. It was all there, right in front of me. They thought they had been clever, but they weren't clever enough. I kept all of it to myself, though. No one could know what I was doing. Not even Aunt Mavis, the one person in my family who always had my back. I couldn't risk her being dragged into this, especially since I knew my parents would try to spin this as my fault. They always had a way of making me the villain. I meticulously gathered every shred of proof I could find, piece by piece. I knew I had to be methodical. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. Once I had everything in order, I set up a meeting with my lawyer. I was ready, or so I thought. The air in the Caldwell house was thick with tension. It was obvious that the family foundation was on the brink of collapse. My parents had always prided themselves on their control, over the family, over their image, over everything. But now, things were falling apart. The foundation was losing donors and their reputation was in jeopardy. My parents were scrambling to save face, trying to keep everything under control. The pressure was mounting, and I could see the cracks starting to form in their carefully constructed world. That was when I made the decision. I wasn't going to let them get away with this anymore. I wasn't going to let them control me, control my story. It was time to expose the truth, to make sure they couldn't hide behind their lies any longer. I had the proof. I had everything I needed. The only thing left to do was go public, to let everyone know what they had done. But just as I was about to take the first step, something happened that shook me to my core. I'd been invited to a gala thrown by the foundation, an event I'd been avoiding for years. But this time, I couldn't stay away. I needed to see what was going on behind the scenes, to get a feel for how desperate they were. As soon as I walked in, I felt it. The same feeling I always got in those rooms, like I was invisible. I watched as everyone fawned over Julia. She was the star of the show, as usual, the perfect daughter, the one everyone loved. My parents were glued to her side, as always, and it made my stomach turn. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. But then, as the night went on, I overheard something that would change everything. Julia was about to announce her big business move. She was planning to expand into luxury real estate, something that I hadn't heard about before. I couldn't believe it. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew Julia had always been ambitious, but this was a whole new level. She had always been the golden child, the one everyone expected to carry the family legacy. But this was different. This wasn't just about her. She had always played the part. But now I saw that she was fully involved in this mess. The lies, the fraud. It wasn't just my parents anymore. Julia was knee-deep in it too. It was like the veil had been lifted. All those years of watching her get everything I never could, all the praise, the awards, the attention, it all started to make sense. She wasn't just a passive participant in the family drama. She was a key player. She had been part of the plan the entire time. And that realization hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't just my parents who had betrayed me. It was Julia too. She had known about the forgery, the stolen inheritance, everything. She had been standing by, playing the perfect daughter while I was left in the dust. I don't know what came over me in that moment, but it felt like I had been holding my breath for years. And now I could finally exhale. I wasn't the only one being lied to anymore. I wasn't the only one who had been manipulated. Julia was just as deep in this as anyone else. She wasn't my sister anymore. She was part of the problem. And just like that, everything shifted. The plan I'd been slowly building up for weeks didn't just feel like a strategy to expose my parents. It became personal. Julia wasn't just the perfect daughter anymore. She was the face of the lie. And it was time for her to face the truth too. As I stood there, watching her smile and shake hands, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her get away with it either. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about setting things right. I had to bring everything into the light. No more hiding, no more secrets. I wasn't going to stay invisible anymore. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who I was. And that included Julia. I was ready. The papers were in my hands, my plan set in motion. It was time. Time to take my family to court. My heart was pounding, my palms sweating, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about getting even. It was about justice. It was about putting an end to the years of being invisible, to the lies, the betrayal. It was time to force them to face the consequences of what they'd done. The courtroom was tense. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I could almost hear the collective breath of the room. My parents sat across from me, their faces pale, their eyes full of fear. It was clear. They knew what was coming. They knew the truth was about to be laid bare. And my sister, Julia, she sat beside them, trying to hold it together, but I could see the crack in her composure. She wasn't as untouchable as she thought. She was part of this, and now she would have to answer for it too. I didn't flinch. My eyes were steady, my mind focused. This wasn't just another moment where I would let their power or their image silence me. No, this was my time to speak up, to make sure they could never erase me again. The judge called for the evidence to be presented. I watched as my lawyer placed the documents on the table. The property deeds, the signed contracts, the forgeries. The key piece, though, was the recording, the one where my mother, Celeste, spoke plainly about erasing me from the family narrative. My heart raced as the words played in the courtroom. We only use Julia's face in marketing. Clara doesn't fit our narrative. My mother's voice was cold, calculating, and for the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. They had been systematically erasing me for years, and now the whole world could hear it. I glanced at my mother. Her face turned crimson, her hands trembling as she looked down, unable to meet my eyes. She tried to control her breath, but I could see the cracks in her carefully constructed persona. This wasn't the woman who had smiled at every gala, at every charity event, pretending to be a perfect mother. This was a woman caught in the web of her own lies. The judge didn't hold back. She was firm, unflinching. "The Bar Harbor property," she said, looking at my parents with piercing eyes, "will be reverted to Miss Clara Caldwell. It was meant to be hers, and the fraudulent transfer to Julia is nullified." The words hit like a wave crashing against the shore. I didn't show it, but inside, there was a sense of relief. Finally, the truth had won. Finally, after all these years, I had my place in the family history, not as a forgotten shadow, but as someone who had fought for her truth. My parents sat there, stunned, unable to speak. Julia, on the other hand, looked like she might faint. She hadn't expected this. Not in a million years. I watched as she quickly gathered her things and left the courtroom, trying to maintain some semblance of composure, but the damage had already been done. I stood there, feeling an overwhelming sense of power, a power I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the daughter who was erased. I was the one who had brought the truth to light, the one who had taken control of her own destiny. Months passed and things started to settle. The Bar Harbor property was officially mine. The family foundation was in turmoil. The public image they had so carefully built was shattered. But for me, I had no interest in that. I didn't need their approval anymore. What mattered was that I had taken control of my life. I used the inheritance to create something that had always been in my heart, a center for art and literature for young people from struggling families. It was my way of giving back, of making sure that no one else had to feel as invisible as I once did. It wasn't about the money. It was about giving them a chance, a space where they could be seen, where they could create their own stories, free from the expectations of a world that only cared about the surface. And then, one day, the letter arrived. From Julia. I wasn't expecting it. Not really. She'd always been so distant, so wrapped up in her own perfect world. But there it was, a single page of paper, her handwriting slanted and sharp, as if she were trying to find the right words but didn't know how. I opened it slowly, almost afraid to read it. It wasn't much, just 10 words, but they hit harder than anything she could have written. "You were right. I'm sorry it took this to see it." I stared at the words for a long time, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to say, "I told you so," but I didn't, because I realized something in that moment. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I had my freedom. I had my truth, and that was all that mattered. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I kept the letter, though, along with a small collection of other things. A few mementos of my past life, of a time when I thought I needed my family's approval to feel whole, but not anymore. Those things were just reminders of how far I'd come, and now, here I was, sitting in the center I had created, watching a group of kids who had the world ahead of them, each one with a story to tell. They were all seen, they were all heard, and I knew that, in some way, I had given them that gift. The future wasn't about my family anymore. It was about me, about the people I chose to surround myself with, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.